background is I'm an engineer who turned into sort of an OD optimizer around management. So my focus is on the behavior of management as a feedback system for the organization, which is distinct from the feedback givers that say kind of what kind of a job people are doing, but actually the system that governs and adjusts the organization and optimizing that. And so everything that I share comes from that sort of engineer optimization perspective. And I think this is a survival level threat on multiple levels, obviously economic, social, spiritual, physical. I feel unqualified to talk about any of that, but I can talk about sort of the optimization piece of the management. And I would invite you to not take my conversation about that as any expression of expertise or even understanding of the other pieces of it. I've honestly had very mixed feelings about people in my space who have come forward so fast with answers, because I don't think we have answers. And I think there's a certain challenge in having something to offer and offering it at the same time, not overstating the situation we're in as solvable, because it really isn't. And so maybe it's the engineer in me who is saying, if anyone starts to tell you what's going to happen, don't trust them, because we don't know yet. And if anyone tells you they've run a survey, ask a lot of questions about who took the survey. And if there were questions about the present state, that's useful. If there were questions about the future, I don't know how good that data really is. Because we just don't know yet. And so my perspective is I can only sort of say what's happening now and what it might mean to sort of business. I can take a guess based on what's happening now, but really I think what's happening now is the most informative thing. And so just a few things on that. First, what's happening now is we don't know what the future state is, right? So my bias is toward a sort of a style of management, a system of management that basically does not require a known future state. So it's different than typical management, which manages to goals and a plan. And it's different than change management, which manages to a well-defined future state. This also happens to create higher output and lower stress and better growth and more agility. So I am seeing that as a need right now, even more than usual. And I'd like to say that I'm seeing recognition of that as a need. I don't know yet. I think that what comes out of that is, and what people have practice with, whether they like it or not, is more flexibility, more focus on taking a step today that seems smart now with the recognition that the step tomorrow will be different. From my perspective and the research I understand, that's actually beneficial. And I think a lot more attention to the dynamics and the processes behind group interactions and how people work together. Ken, you mentioned something along the lines of disagree and commit, which is when we actually make an agreement, do we keep it? That's my words for that. But I think that the forced movement to virtualization and remote work, it has the potential to drive more attention to some process stuff that has been sorely needed in many group interactions for a long time. So I view that as a potential positive in the long term, not to mitigate the pain in the short term. I think that the second thing that you can say sort of related to that, I think that we can all sort of easily say is, yeah, everybody's working remotely now. So what does it mean? From my perspective, there's a real big division between the people who have worked remote some before and those who haven't, right? So you've got people who have been in globalized companies or their teams are remote or whatever, and so they have these muscles around working remote. And then you have people like my elementary school kids' school that have never done a remote thing in their lives. And you've got people that have been managing teams of people and leading groups of people for years and decades in person. And there's a huge amount of information that comes across the nonverbal in person that doesn't come across on screen. And so when you think about that transition from unconscious competence to unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence to conscious competence to unconscious competence, you've got an unconsciously competent group of people taking that information and processing it and work with it. And you've got an unconsciously incompetent group of people at doing that because they've never done it before. And we need to figure out how to replicate years of migration to unconscious competence. And I don't think that all of the people offering webinars and how to work virtually and where to click the button to make it work is going to help with that. That's also needed. But I think we have to deal with that and also fold in this thing about, I said before, group dynamics and meeting process and those kind of things in that new world. And I think that's an emerging need, and different people are in different places with respect to what they're doing with that. The third thing I'm seeing, I think, is another splitting, which is between groups. And back to the engineer thing, it's a 2x2 matrix because my brain works that way. You can be physically impacted by this thing, you can be economically impacted by this thing, and those are independent axes, right? So if you're impacted in either way, and there are people right now that aren't, you're kind of going on about your day, not in an undisrupted way, but in a relatively undisrupted way relative to your peers in the other boxes, right? If you're only physically impacted, then your future vector depends a lot on how well our healthcare system is going to function. And I see a very strong need for better and different management in that space. And I think there's going to be some attention on that. Hopefully it leads to a good place. I don't know. If you're in the other box, which is I have an economic problem but not a physical problem, now there's an economics question, which is how well are the rest of the organizations functioning, and how well can they come back, and will they be able to chart their course back from this in the ways others have talked about on this call, or are we going to see a very, very long tail that's partly driven by our own inability to adapt? And then of course you've got people that are in the both box, and that's a difficult situation all its own. And you know, anything in the health box, either one, has this other issue of degrees of impact, which can have serious consequences, as we all know, up to and including loss of life. So that's all difficult to deal with at the individual level, and also important to consider, I think, at the systemic level. Fourth thing I want to briefly touch on that kind of came to me as everyone else was talking was, you know, this conversation, Garo mentioned it, Carlan and Michael, you kind of talked about this kind of federal state question. From my perspective in my work, it's actually a perspective of group intelligence. I always tell the story, and when I'm talking about kind of the group work about, you know, Southwest Airlines and how they board planes, right? So you've got this whole body of academics or research around the fastest way to board airplanes, and there's terminology around the different disruptions that happen when you board an airplane, right? The thing about somebody's in your aisle seat and you're in the window seat is one kind, and the thing about somebody's in the front standing up and you're on the back, that's another kind. They've done all these studies and these models, and they've, over the years, and all of us in this call have been around a while, you know, worked on different ways to board aircraft front to back, side to side, left to right, into out. And consistently the fastest model is Southwest model, in which they say, get on the plane and sit down fast. And they leave the rest to group intelligence. And oftentimes results work better when left to group intelligence. And so when you centralize too much and you take away too much of that group intelligence, you know, now you've got the people on my neighborhood Facebook page who are looking at someone saying, why is that person with a kid that's not theirs? The answer might be the person is flouting the rule. The answer might be the person is a critical healthcare worker and their kid has to be with somebody else right now. But we'll do a little better in those kind of cases if we let the group intelligence work it instead of trying to abstract up to a general rule that maps everybody. But it's a balance, and it's not clear where to put the balance. I think that's going to be hard. And I think the balance is as a side note, further impacted by fear, right? Carlan mentioned fear. You know, I have multiple friends who have apparently flipped politically from a people should do whatever they want kind of ideology to a everybody better do what I think they should do to keep everyone safe kind of ideology. And it's stunning the effect of fear on that changeover. And so, you know, awareness of that effect and filtering that awareness into our group decision making is, I think, going to be helpful if we can find a way to keep that awareness of, hey, as humans functioning in groups, these are things that can come into play, and here's what it looks like when they do. And the last thing I want to say is, remember, engineer, data quality and database decision making. I mentioned surveys already. Who's taking them? What are they asking? Why are they asking that? Is it even a reasonable question? Are they asking people that might know? There's a whole big piece of work just barely emerging now, I think, around data quality related to the issue of the pandemic, right? So if you only test people who have died, then your mortality rate by definition is 100%. And if you only test people who are sick, then your severity rate is higher. And our testing is lagging everything because of the testing limitations right now. And so we don't actually know very well what's happening. And there's sort of I haven't seen it said quite like this, but there's this very strong sort of message in a lot of what you see in the media that, like, when they test and find a case, that's a new case. You know, when they found the first case in area X, that was the first case in area X. It wasn't. It was just the first test they ran on the person who had it in area X. And, you know, I haven't heard a lot of statisticians popping up and saying, let me explain to you, you know, if I have a city of 1 million people and I've run 27 tests, what's the likely, you know, we need that. Anyone who I've seen who has tried to be a voice in that direction has often gotten squished out and shut down and said, you know, it's like you're not panicking enough. And my favorite line from one of those was, I'm trying to only, you know, panic about the right things, because there's plenty of right things to panic about, and I'm trying not to panic about the wrong things, but there's not that much of that.
That's a great lesson for future organizations to understand that. That's a great lesson, Ed.
I hope we can get it there, the organizations and out into the world. And you know, the last thing I'll say about that, and the last thing I'll say at all is, I've done a couple of these open calls with colleagues and clients, and one thing that came out of one of them was this idea of, you know, it would be really helpful if we had some clear flags for action that were universally agreed upon, and then what the action was. Not, you know, federal, state, everyone stay in your house, but just some general, like, what does a red look like? What does an orange look like? What does a green look like? So that we can have at least some shared high level conceptual understanding of what kind of risk are we seeing. And I think maybe, I hope this will drive us in that direction. I think all I can say about the present is we don't seem to have that now. And we seem to have sort of a narrative that is or isn't related to, real factual data. And I think that's I hope, an opportunity. I don't know whether we'll make use of it or not, but I think that's about all I can really talk about. And I probably talked long enough. So thank you for the opportunity.